Welcome back to BlockTV. It's time now for HODL with HEDL, a chance to zoom out for a moment and take a wider perspective of some of the heady issues that dominate the crypto markets as a whole. And to guide us on this journey of discovery, we're joined by early Bitcoiner and thought leader Dan Held, co-founder of asset management firm Interchange. Dan, thanks for joining us.
As always, thanks for having me.
So, kick things off this week, of course, we can't not be speaking about the massive price movements that we've seen in Bitcoin so far in the last week. 10,000, ain't no thing. 11,000, who even cares? We're up to like 11.4 already today. So, I mean, what's driving this sort of price action, and what's your sort of hot take, as it were?
That's a good question. As always, it's very, very difficult to understand what caused the price to move. Sort of like understanding if a butterfly flapped its wings in another country, if that small amount of wind moved over there caused a hurricane in another country. I think what we're seeing with Bitcoin is that there's some consolidation in the space in terms of performance, going back to sort of the core crypto that has always performed well, the core crypto that really represents something useful, which is Gold 2.0. And what we've seen over the last week is that Bitcoin's price has skyrocketed to 11,400 as of this conversation. But everything else has either dropped or barely moved up. And that's very, very important because there's different time periods where either all crypto assets move up together or they diverge. And right now we're seeing a divergence. And to me, that signals sort of a flight to quality, a flight to what's real. Whereas 2017, like late 2017, we saw all cryptocurrencies move up, regardless of how silly they were or how explicit they were as a scam. For example, BitConnect being worth a few $1 billion. So I think we're seeing a flight back to quality right now, which is a really interesting sort of movement. If we look at traditional market cycles in the cryptocurrency space, this is a little soon. This is a little bit fast, which isn't necessarily a bad or good thing. It just looks like Bitcoin is starting to accelerate much faster than we thought it would, which could mean a lot of different things. You know, this might mean that other people are looking at the price of Bitcoin, and everyone in anticipation of it moving up have decided to purchase a little bit earlier.
But looking, I guess, specifically at specific events or occurrences within the Bitcoin space that could be driving it, do you see anything that stands out or any potential things that could help to drive the price further as we look into the future?
Well, there are a few catalysts that could be influencing this. One could be macroeconomic conditions. This could be concerns, worries, anxiety around existing financial system or governance issues. For example, like a trade war with China and the United States would definitely introduce risk and uncertainty into the markets. And Bitcoin, its ultimate purpose being a risk-off trade, right now it's still very much risk-on. And what that means is people buy Bitcoin when they feel risky. In the future, people will buy Bitcoin when they feel less risky. So we'll see Bitcoin become that risk-off trade. And I think those macro environments that introduce a lot of risk to the system, like a trade war, those will accelerate and boost Bitcoin's price because people will buy that when they feel fearful. Also, we've got some positive news in San Francisco with the Bitcoin 2019 conference going on. So that conference, kind of like the consensus pump, as a lot of people used to call it, the consensus pump was the pump that would happen in the markets when consensus in New York would happen. And I think we're starting to see that a little bit with the Bitcoin 2019 conference in San Francisco, definitely being at the heart of where crypto lives and being super, super positive. I was out at a few events last night and definitely seems to have a very special intensity, just like the consensus week.
Yeah, certainly it does seem that this is a community that when they get together can create some pretty significant shifts in the market. But now I want to take this chance now to shift back for a second, because you raised an interesting point there where you said that it now is a risk-on investment at the moment Bitcoin is, and hasn't quite solidified itself as that store of value position, at least in the wider market outside of the specific crypto community. However, there's one thing that will always come down to the fact of the matter is that there is only ever going to be 21 million Bitcoin ever created. At the moment, we're standing at around 17.7 million Bitcoin in circulation at the moment. And the fact is that in a growing market with growing interest in investment, there just aren't that many to go around, right, Dan?
That's right. And that's what makes Bitcoin very, very special, is the scarcity that it has. In fact, it's really hard for us to fathom what true scarcity feels like. If we lose $1, we know that more dollars are being printed. If we lost a cell phone, there's more cell phones being created. But there will only ever be 21 million Bitcoins no matter what. And that 21 million Bitcoins will be printed since Bitcoin's inception all the way through the year about 2140. And if we look at 21 million and then we take out the Bitcoins that are probably lost, we're looking at a very small amount of coins or a small amount of units in circulation for the overall world, which is a really interesting scenario, because essentially what Bitcoiners and other people who speculate in Bitcoin's price, essentially what they're betting on is that other people will believe in the scarce value that Bitcoin has. They'll believe that there will only be 21 million. And that's really, really powerful. There's not many other things in our lives, like if we think about, maybe artwork or family members are truly scarce, where there is only one copy. There's only one copy of your parents. There's only one copy of Mona Lisa. There's only one unique original. And with Bitcoin, I think a lot of people, when they look at that scarce number, it sort of scares them in a way, because it's just so, when you think about the implications of there only being that many, it scares a lot of people in terms of thinking like, okay, that's it. I live in a world where we print as much as we want, or we create as much as we want. And Bitcoin, for the first time, introduced digital scarcity. And I think that concept, a lot of people, when they come to realize it, I think that's when Bitcoin truly becomes very, very powerful, is when everyone kind of buys in and realizes how scarce Bitcoin really is.
But I suppose in thinking about this notion of scarcity, people can make that comparison to gold or perhaps to land, real estate, things like that do have a finite amount within the system. But on the flip side of that, I suppose, in the same way that those asset classes, such as gold or real estate, aren't necessarily going to be used for day-to-day transactions, is Bitcoin going to lose any possibility of being a sort of over-the-counter daily use currency? And is it going to just take on that sole proposition as a store of value? And if that is the case, is that necessarily a bad thing?
I think Bitcoin evolves in stages, where Bitcoin is most useful initially as a store of value. Then later down the road, when the price stabilizes, it becomes better as a medium of exchange and unit of account. Just like we don't price our groceries locally in gold, but gold is still very useful as a store of value. Now, if gold was more transferable in a digital format, people might at a later date, when the price stabilizes, decide to go transact with it. And so that's what I think is that Bitcoin, even though Lightning, for example, solves the user experience around speed and transaction fees, it's still a little bit more onerous than your existing payment method. But in the future, when the price stabilizes and let's say Bitcoin does become very successful, and that's the currency everyone in the world uses, then we can also use it in that format of using it to pay for groceries, and it'll be much, much easier to use, let's say 5 to 10 years from now. So I think it'll take a very long time. Money is a shared belief system. So we all believe in money, whether it be fiat, gold, or Bitcoin. And I think for Bitcoin to really permeate the consciousness of the world, that takes a very long time to do. We're talking decades, at a minimum like 5 to 10 years. So it'll be a long time before it becomes the unit of account then in our payment method for everything that we do.
Well, that belief structure question really segues nicely into my next point of discussion, which is this notion of the HODLers, the early Bitcoin adopters, those that got in before it took on the sort of mainstream appeal, serving a very specific role in the industry. And Dan, as an early adopter yourself, how would you characterize that role?
A lot of people look at early HODLers and they perceive them as lucky, but I look at it as the opposite. HODLers really bootstrapped Bitcoin into existence. HODLing increases the value of Bitcoin, which increases demand, hash rate, and network security. And that in turn attracts new HODLers, developers, and it's a self-reinforcing feedback loop. these early hodlers believed in Bitcoin despite tons of negative information. For example, when I got into Bitcoin, in 2012, 2013, a lot of people, it was funny at dinner parties, at different family events, all your family members and friends would consider you, kind of, it wasn't a cool thing to do. It was very unsavory. At that time, working in Bitcoin meant that you were building software for money launderers and drug dealers. And, it really took a patience. It really took someone who had a strong appetite for risk to go weather that volatility and to weather that FUD, to weather all of the fear, uncertainty, and doubt that your friends, family, and other people in your life would insert, and they would go, hey, this looks really volatile, it looks really risky, it's being used by bad people, and you were like, wait a second, this is actually building something really great. And so it took someone who wanted to take on that risk and really dig in and take the red pill, wake up to the reality of their financial system. And the early hodlers are exactly why Bitcoin is here today. Without hodlers, there are no devs, there are no miners. HODLers are the most important part of Bitcoin's ecosystem.
And then looking at how that ecosystem has developed since then, I mean, we say that there have been waves of adopters coming in. First you had the anarcho-capitalists and the cypherpunks, and then you had the pioneer investors, and then you had the speculators. And now in this next wave of growth, we're really seeing that mainstream adoption taking off, particularly in the wake of big mainstream announcements, of course, like the Libra Association and the Libra Project, really bringing it into the mainstream. I mean, do you think that there's still a place for those early hodlers, other than, of course, they're the ones with the swollen bank accounts, but do you think that there is a place culturally within the future of cryptocurrencies for these people?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think hodlers sort of define the culture in Bitcoin. And we see this reflected on different channels, whether it be Reddit, Twitter, Medium. A lot of content that's created is through the hodlers. And a lot of these hodlers also build things, whether they build, I've built some early crypto products starting back in 2013. A lot of hodlers, it's irresistible to go build, new products for their other believers, the other Bitcoin users. I think the culture in Bitcoin, especially around, private key management, the 21 million hard cap, and other characteristics are incredibly important that we preserve that, because we should know, back to the scarcity point, with Ethereum, they've changed their inflation rate multiple times. With Bitcoin, the inflation rate or the issuance schedule has never changed. And we can rely on the Bitcoin community and the intensity the Bitcoin community has. We can that's a very strong guarantee that the amount of Bitcoins, 21 million, will never be larger than that. Whereas with Ethereum and other cryptocurrencies where that number is more malleable, we can't fully rely on that. And so Bitcoin, or the early hodlers, when they buy into that belief of 21 million Bitcoins. They buy into the belief of freedom. They buy into the belief that we're trading something abundant for something scarce, trading the past for the future, and trading financial dependence for financial sovereignty. And so the hodlers really breathe that culture into the Bitcoin community. And I think they're the ones who need to preserve it. The new Bitcoiners, the new hodlers that come in, I think will have to agree to those terms of freedom, agree to those terms of only 21 million. And so it takes old hodlers and new hodlers for that to happen.
But I wonder, on the flip side of that vision, I guess it were, when the internet, for example, was created, that was designed as a space for free accessibility, independent thought. It was a space for anonymity, and a lot of those similar revolutionary ideals that then permeated into the crypto sphere later on really existed in those early days of the internet. But unfortunately, as we've seen time and again, once big corporate interests come into play and governments start taking hold of a sector, they are able to tame the Wild West, as it were. Do you think the cryptoverse inevitably is going to face the same fate, or there can be some sort of holdout?
Well, Bitcoin already faced that fate, and that's a really great question, is how does Bitcoin preserve that decentralization and that kind of preservation of its original ethos? And Bitcoin already survived this with the SegWit 2x sort of New York agreement, where Bitcoin companies tried to get together and force a block size increase on the Bitcoin core development team. And the users of Bitcoin, the hodlers, rejected this. Bitcoin hodlers did not want corporate interests to take over the direction of Bitcoin. And so Bitcoin has already successfully fought off those sort of attempts, whereas many other cryptocurrencies haven't even reached that stage in their life cycle of their development. So that reflected a very, very important moment for Bitcoin, a very important moment in its maturity, that it could resist external companies that were very powerful with very powerful financial interests. It could successfully push those away because those would have threatened its decentralization and the core ethos of the community.
All right, well, it seems that there is still a long way to go for Bitcoin, but certainly, as you say, Dan, they've managed to weather some of those early storms, and it'll be interesting to see how it develops into the future. So I want to thank you, Dan Held, for HODL with HEDL, and for this week's update. I look forward to chatting with you again next week. And thank you for staying with us at blocktv.com, where we'll have all the latest in both the micro and macro elements of the whole cryptoverse. I'm Asher Westrop Evans. Thanks for watching.
For more news and updates, follow us on Twitter.